Hey guys, tonight we are slipping our bare feet into the Nile mud, and if you're already cringing at the thought of clay wedging itself under your toenails, well, welcome to the life of a Nubian potter. You may not survive the first day, honestly, because this job starts before the sun even remembers to clock in. But don't worry, you'll have me narrating, which means at least your ears stay clean even if your hands don't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me your city and the current time. It's always fun to imagine all of us scattered around the world, half asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year begins with you standing knee-deep in the riverbank silt, scooping up handfuls of sticky, gray clay. This isn't glamorous work. It's more squelch and strain than art and craft. Yet, clay is the start of everything: your roof tiles, your neighbor's cooking cots, even the little wild lamps flickering at night are born from this mud. Without clay, a Nubian village feels naked, and right now, you are the one responsible for dressing it. You dug at a stubborn lump, wondering why the Nile always makes you work harder than you planned. What makes this clay special is its mixture of fine river silt blended with bits of sand, stura, and sometimes even ground up shards of old pots. Archaeologists still argue whether recycling broken pottery was mostly practical, or if it had some ritual element. Maybe it was superstition, old pots, new luck, or maybe, like every tired potter across history, you just didn't want good material going to waste. Either way, you shovel fragments into your basket, the sound of crunching terracotta echoing like tiny bones. Mid-morning, your hands are coated in a thin mask of muck. You smear it across your arms accidentally, scratching your nose only to decorate your own face. You look less like a craftsman and more like a swamp creature auditioning for a children's play. But hey, this is how pots are born. The mess first, a beauty later. Let's pause for a knowledge nugget. Nubian pottery is famous for its burnished red and black finishes, created by carefully controlling the oxygen flow in kilns. Scholars debate whether this striking look was a happy accident discovered when someone oversmoked their fire, or a deliberate artistic choice perfected over generations. Either way, you are standing at the muddy start of that entire tradition. The clay is heavy. Every trip back from the river feels like carrying the entire village on your shoulders, but there's an odd rhythm to it. Sep, squelch, lift, dump. The work is monotonous, but strangely soothing, almost like a meditation with a bad smell. Children run past you laughing, splashing each other, and you resist the urge to splash them back with a mud ball. You'd probably get yelled at by their mothers, and you don't need extra trouble this early in the year. By the time the sun arcs high, your pile of raw clay is big enough to impress even the nosiest neighbor. Tomorrow, you'll start mixing and kneading, folding in sand and straw until the clay is just right. But today, you end with dirty hands and the satisfaction of knowing you've gathered the very bones of your craft. It's not glamorous, but it's life. The kiln wakes up before you do. At least, that's how it feels. Dawn has only just skimmed the horizon when you hear the first cough of smoke pushing out of the clay chimney. You drag yourself over, still yawning, and watch as the fire turns last night's pile of firewood into an orange heartbeat. Kilns don't care if you're tired. They demand attention, like spoiled cats made of brick and ash. And you're the one who has to keep them purring. The morning air tastes of smoke and I'll mixed together. It's not unpleasant, just clingy, The kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and announces to everyone in the market, "Yep, that's the potter," some neighbors claim. They can predict your luck for the day by the way the smoke curls. If it rises straight and steady, maybe the jars won't crack this time. If it tumbles sideways, they shake their heads like they've just watched an omen go sour. You're tempted to roll your eyes, but deep down, even you can't help glancing at the sky and wondering if the kiln is trying to send you a memo. Now here's a historical tidbit worth knowing. Nubian kilns were typically updraft kilns, basically mud brick ovens, with separate chambers for the fire and the pots. This design helped keep the heat even, or at least even enough that not everything came out looking like a collapsed bread loaf. Archaeologists still argue over whether the designs were locally invented or borrowed from Egyptian neighbors up north. The debate is older than the soot stains inside your kiln. And honestly, you're just trying to make sure today's batch doesn't explode. The fire has its moods. Sometimes it burns too hot. Sometimes it sulks and refuses to catch. You crouch with your face too close for comfort, blowing into the embers until you're dizzy and muttering something halfway between a prayer and a complaint. The clay pots waiting inside creak softly as they heat ties. Pots can creak like nervous actors waiting backstage. You pat the side of the kiln like a friend, whispering encouragement. "Hold together. Don't betray me now." Let's sneak in a quirky fact. Some potters kept little clay figurines near their kilns as charms. Were they mascots? Were they divine guardians? Historians still aren't sure. All you know is that yours is a chipped clay bird with one wing missing, perched beside the fire like it's supervising. You've given it a name, Captain Ash, because if you're going to talk to inanimate objects at this hour, you might as well commit fully. By the time the sun climbs higher, the kiln is roaring. Neighbors are already sniffing the air, curious whether the potter's work smells like success or disappointment today. You lean back, hands streaked with charcoal, eyelids heavy. This is the part no one tells you about. Half the job is just waiting for clay to dry, waiting for fires to stabilize, waiting for something to not go wrong. The kiln hums, a smoke swirls, and you realize this patience is as much part of your craft as your hands are. Eventually, the kiln settles into a steady rhythm, breathing in firewood, exhaling smoke, glowing like a second sun in your yard. You earn a small break. You stretch, sip some water, and smile despite yourself. For all its tantrums, there's nothing quite like watching clay transform under your care. The kiln doesn't just cook pots, it cooks your reputation, your livelihood, and sometimes your pride. As the day warms, you know this fire will burn for hours, maybe days. You've just started your year, and already you're reminded being a Nubian potter is less about making pots and more about making peace with smoke. The market is louder than your kiln ever was. By the time you arrive, balancing a basket of freshly fired pots on your hip, the air is already buzzing with shouting vendors, bleating goats, and the occasional donkey braying like it wants everyone to know it's the star of the show. You weave through the chaos, careful not to bump into anyone, because dropping one pot here would be like spilling your wallet into the Nile. You find your usual spot, a shady corner near a spice seller who smells perpetually like cumin and coriander. He nods at you, already making jokes about how many pots he's going to break accidentally so it doesn't have to pay. You roll your eyes, set down your goods, and start arranging them. Water jars, oil lamps, bowls for lentils. Each piece catches the sunlight differently, some gleaming with that classic Nubian burnish, others looking humble and practical, And here's the thing, markets aren't just for selling, they're for gossip. Within minutes, someone leans over your jars to whisper about who argued with whom, or which farmer's cow produced sour milk, or which family is hiding a secret wedding. Your pots, it seems, double as the village's unofficial newsstands. Everyone picks one up, turns it over, inspects the bottom as though they're looking for a headline. You smile politely, all the while wondering if you're making more money selling clay or just lending out your stall as a rumor booth. Fun fact for you, archaeologists have found fragments of Nubian pottery across trade routes, sometimes hundreds of miles from their origin. That means your little oil lamp, if sold to the right traveling merchant, might one day end up in a far-off village where nobody knows your name. They'll still argue over whether your work is sturdy enough. Scholars still debate how far these networks really stretched and whether potters like you fully realized how global their handiwork could become. For now, your world feels only as wide as this crowded market square. A young boy picks up a bowl and pretends it's a soldier's helmet. His mother scolds him. You wince and crack. The bowl didn't survive his imagination. The mother apologizes, shoving a few coins into your hand, but you can't help sighing. It's not just that you lost a piece. It's that every broken pot is hours of clay gathering and kiln tending crumbling in your palm. Still, at least she paid. Some neighbors would have smiled sheepishly and walked away muttering about bad luck. Markets also bring the unexpected. Today, a merchant from farther south eyes your jars and asks if you can make something taller, thinner, and decorated with spiral patterns. His wares are popular in his hometown. You nod thoughtfully, though inside you're wondering whether he's describing pottery or some impractical fashion trend. Either way, a commission is a commission. You jot the idea in your mind, even as you suspect the design will collapse on your wheel at least twice before you get it right. By midday, you've sold enough to feel the weight of coins in your pouch. Not riches, exactly, more like reassurance that tomorrow's lentils are covered. You pack up your remaining pots, brushing off the dust and gossip they've collected, and prepare to head home. The market always leaves you drained, a strange cocktail of satisfaction, frustration, and cumin-scented hair. As you walk back, the Nile glitters in the distance, reminding you that tomorrow will begin again with clay under your nails. For now, though, you've earned a moment of pride. Your pots are out there, holding water, storing grain, maybe even starring in someone else's whispered story. In their silence, they're louder than you'll ever be. Tonight your hands are trembling, a little not from fatigue, but from the weight of expectation. The priest from the local temple visited yesterday, and he didn't come for a cooking pot or a lamp. No, he came for something far more nerve-wracking. A cup for the gods. That's not the kind of commission you shrug off like a cracked bowl. This one has to be flawless, or at least flawless enough that no one dares whisper otherwise. You sit at your wheel, coaxing the clay into shape, the soft spinning hum filling the silence of your workshop. The wheel doesn't judge you, but you swear it can sense your nerves. Your fingers press too hard, and suddenly the rim wobbles. You mutter under your breath, smoothing it down, imagining the gods rolling their celestial eyes. Really, this is what we're drinking from. A quick history note here. Nubian pottery wasn't just for kitchens. Archaeologists have found ceremonial vessels buried in graves and temples, often decorated more carefully than everyday wares. Scholars still debate whether those special designs carried coded religious symbols, or if they were just fancier pots for fancier people. In this moment, don't care what the debate says, you just know you've been asked to make something that looks divine. The clay resists, As if testing your patience, you whisper to it, promising extra polishing if it behaves. You even cause to sprinkle a pinch of sand into the mix, hoping it adds strength. Did ancient potters really talk to their clay? Historians probably won't find written proof of that, but judging by your current conversation with a half-formed cup, you're pretty sure it's a timeless tradition. By midday, the shape stands tall and even. Relief washes over you, but you know this is just the first hurdle. Next comes firing, and firing is always a gamble. You prepare the kiln like a nervous host before a big guest arrives. More wood, more careful stacking, and yes, you place Captain Ash, your chipped claybird mascot, right by the entrance, because if there's any day you need divine backup, it's today. As the flames rise, you pace like a parent outside a delivery room. Neighbors wander over, curious, whispering, "He's making a God's cup today." That doesn't help your nerves. You shoo them away, but not before someone mutters that crooked smoke is a bad omen. You glare at the sky. If the kiln wants to sabotage you, could it at least do it quietly? When the fire finally comes, you pull out the vessel. It gleams reddish black, smooth as if it was polished by the Nile itself. Perfect. Not exactly. One tiny ripple along the rim betrays your shaky fingers. But will the gods notice or care? The priest inspects it the next morning, nods solemnly, and declares it worthy. You exhale so hard your lungs nearly collapse. Later, when you sit down to your humble dinner of lentils and bread, you chuckle at the irony. You eat from a chip bowl, while the gods sip from your best work. Such is the life of a potter. You're the unseen hand behind beauty, but your own table remains plain. Rain in Nubia isn't polite. It doesn't patter down gently like a background melody. It barges in like an uninvited guest, drenching everything, and then leaves behind puddles deep enough to swallow sandals. This morning you step outside and realize your yard looks less like a workshop and more like a rehearsal space for amphibians. The Nile has spilled its mood everywhere, and you are suddenly wondering whether clay can drown. You slosh through the muck towards your clay pit. It's overflowing, thick and soupy, as if it wants to mold itself without you. Good luck with it. You know from experience that clay left alone just turns into a soggy disappointment. Still, part of you sighs in relief. Flood season may be messy, but it's also generous. The river gives you endless fresh silt, a reminder of why people settled here in the first place. Without this cycle, there'd be no crops, no pots, no you. Here's the historical anchor. Nubian life revolved around the Nile's floods. Each year, the waters spread fertile soil that fed both farming and pottery alike. Archaeologists note that potters timed much of their work around these seasons, gathering clay when it was richest, sometimes even building kilns on higher ground to avoid watery disasters. Scholars still debate how much of this scheduling was deliberate strategy versus simply learning the hard way every year. Judging by the state of your soggy yard, you suspect it was a bit of both. Back at your workshop, the rain drums on the roof like 100 impatient fingers. You need the wet clay, but it's tricky. Too much water, and the mixture slides through your hands like soup. Too little, and it crumbles like stale bread. You mutter at the sky, asking if it could possibly rain just a little less enthusiastically next time. The sky, as usual, ignores you. Your neighbors handle it differently. Some celebrate the flood season, splashing around and pretending it's a festival. Others groan, worrying about ruined grain or collapsed walls. You, meanwhile, straddle both moods, half grateful, half annoyed. Grateful because this is your livelihood without floods. No clay. Annoyed because, well, Your sandals are now hostages in the mud. There's also the practical challenge of drying pots in this weather. You set a few pieces out, hoping the drizzle will pause, only for them to slump sadly. Like tired bread dough, you scoop them back up, reshaping, reminding yourself that pottery is as much about resilience as it is about craft. Every collapse is just another chance to try again, though that mantra feels less comforting when your cloak is soaked through. Here's a curious fact. Some historians suggest Nubian potters deliberately used the unpredictable flood patterns to their advantage, claiming that pots shaped during wetter seasons had unique textures once dried. Others dismissed this as poetic exaggeration, pointing out that no sane potter wants a prize cracks. You're inclined to agree with the latter. Romance is nice, but reliable pots keep lentils safe. By evening, the rain slows to a drizzle. You stand in a muddy yard, staring at your clay piles and half-formed bowls, wondering if tomorrow's sun will dry them, or if you'll just repeat today's comedy. Either way, you smile faintly. Floods may make you curse under your breath, but they also remind you your craft is tied to the Nile's moods, and as long as the river floods, your hands will always have work. Dinner tonight is not glamorous. It rarely is. You sit cross-legged on a reed mat, balancing a flat piece of bread in one hand while scooping lentils with the other. The bread is chewy, the lentils soft, and together they make a meal that feels more like fuel than feast. Still, you eat with quiet satisfaction. Potters don't live on praise alone, thus sometimes it feels like you live mostly on lentils. Here's the historical note. Archaeological digs in Nubia reveal charred grains, seeds, and pottery fragments that suggest a diet heavy in cereals, lentils, cheese, and occasionally fish. Meat was a luxury, something for festivals or wealthier tables. For you, flatbread is the reliable hero, baked on clay griddles you probably made yourself. There's a strange comfort in eating from your own craft, even if it means you're your own most loyal customer. As you chew, you overhear neighbors chatting about that potter who eats better than he sells. You laugh softly. If only they knew. Your dinner is modest, but the joke's on theme. At least your bowl doesn't collapse under stew, which is more than you can say for some of their bargain pieces. Food also ties you to rhythm. Lentils in the cool season, onions when the fields permit, days when the palms are generous. Your kitchen isn't stocked with variety, but it cycles like the seasons, and somehow the repetition is soothing. There's comfort in knowing tomorrow's dinner will taste a lot like today's. You sigh, telling yourself it's predictable in a good way, like a lullaby sung by beans. A quirky detail. Some pots unearthed in Nubia have soot marks so thick that archaeologists speculate they weren't just cooking vessels, but multitaskers, bowls, ovens, and maybe even impromptu pillows if someone got desperate enough. Scholars are still debating whether soot patterns reveal cooking styles or just sloppy fire tending. Ew. Staring at the blackened bottom of your own pot. Suspect it's both. The meal ends with a sweet, no dates, sticky and rich, pulled from a shared basket. The sugar clings to your teeth, making you smile despite yourself. Even a potter deserves dessert. You lick your fingers, then glance at your hands and laugh. Clay still lines your nails from earlier. So technically you're seasoning your dates with Nile mud. Delicious. If you enjoy irony, as night deepens, you stretch out, full but not stuffed. The simplicity of the meal leaves you light, ready for another day of kneading, shaping, and firing. You wonder if historians centuries from now will dig up your bowls and think, this belonged to a potter who lived on lentils. They'll be right. though you'd prefer they had, and had made a mean flatbread scoop. You blow out the oil lamp, the smell of lentils still lingering in the air, and let the quiet hum of the Nile lull you toward sleep. Tomorrow, the clay waits. Tonight, you dream of bread that never burns. Your neighbor knocks before breakfast. That's never a good sign. You open the door, still rubbing sleep out of your eyes. And sure enough, she's holding a pot. Not just any pot, your pot. And she's giving you this sheepish smile that says, I broke it, but can we pretend it broke itself? Borrowing is a village sport. You've lost track of how many bowls, jars, and cups have wandered out of your house only to return chipped, cracked, or mysteriously redecorated with soot stains. Sometimes they don't come back at all. You joke to yourself that one day, every household will own a mismatched set of your pottery, like you're running a subscription service you never signed up for. Here's the historical piece. Nubian communities thrived on sharing. Archaeologists often find entire clusters of pottery fragments in communal spaces, suggesting that dishes moved easily between households. Scholars debate whether this was a sign of economic cooperation or just neighborly borrowing gone permanent. From where you're standing, holding yet another cracked jar, you vote for the latter. You take the pot gently, tapping its rim. It's salvageable. Maybe you could patch it with resin, though it will never look the same. You mutter a few words about careless neighbors, but she just laughs and says she'll bring bread later to thank you. You sigh. Bread bribes work every time. The truth is, you don't really mind. Every borrowed pot is free advertising. Someone will use it, someone will comment on it, and suddenly, your work has traveled to 3 houses away without you lifting a finger. You imagine your pots gossiping about you when you're not around. He made me on a hot day. He sneezed while polishing me. I was meant for oil, but now I hold onions. A quirky fact worth sharing. In some parts of Nubia, archaeologists found ceramic vessels repurposed into unexpected rose-grain scoops, toy drums, even makeshift stools. You chuckle imagining your neighbor sitting on one of your jars, swearing it was always meant to be a chair. Scholars still argue whether these reuses were clever recycling or simply desperation. You suspect it was a bit of both, like calling a cracked jar decorative. By midday, another knock. This time it's a cousin with an empty water jug. Just for today, he promises. You hand it over, knowing full well today might mean next season. You wonder if potters elsewhere in the world deal with this endless chain of lending, or if it's just Nubian neighbors who treat your shelves like their own. That night, as you tidy your workshop, you count your remaining pots. The shelves feel thinner than yesterday, but the village feels fuller. Your craft doesn't just sit in your home, it circulates, carrying water, grain, and gossip. You chuckle, realizing you don't just make pottery, you accidentally make community. You don't even flinch anymore when you hear a crash in the yard. That's just the sound of children learning. 2 apprentices, barely tall enough to reach the wheel without standing on tiptoe, are wrestling with clay like it's an enemy soldier. One presses too hard, the other pulls too fast, and the pot wobbles dramatically before surrendering to gravity. Shatter. Another piece of pottery gone. You sigh. But honestly, this is how you learn it too. Training new hands is a strange mix of comedy and tragedy. Comedy, because the kids' faces contort like they're summoning magic, only to end up with clay blobs that look more like bread dough than jars. Tragedy, because every failure costs clay, time, and your patience. Still, you keep letting them try. You remind yourself, better to break pots now than later. When someone's grain supply is at stake, Here's the knowledge piece. In ancient Nubia, pottery skills were often passed down through families or small apprenticeships. Archaeologists can even trace learning curves in shards, and vessels are clearly practice pieces, lumpy and uneven, mixed in with more polished works. Scholars still argue whether these were sold cheaply, given away, or just abandoned as the price of progress. Looking at today's growing pile of shattered lessons, you suspect the last one is most accurate. The apprentices look at you nervously after each disaster, waiting for scolding. Instead, you crack a grin. Congratulations, you say. You've invented abstract art. They laugh, shoulders unclenching, and then immediately ruin another bowl. Progress is slow, but their joy is contagious. Meanwhile, actual children and apprentices, just the neighborhood gang, wander in to watch. They poke at the clay, daring each other to spin the wheel faster, giggling when their hands get stuck in the mud. You shoo them out, but not before one manages to sneak off with a lopsided cup. Somewhere in the village, you know that cup will become a toy drum or maybe a storage jar for beetles. A quirky little fact: some shards of ancient Nubian pottery show signs of being used as writing surfaces, scratch notes, or doodles pressed into broken pieces. Historians debate whether this was practice for scribes or just kids drawing goats for fun. Watching your apprentices today, you're inclined to believe in the goat theory. By evening, the workshop is littered with broken pots, clay smears on every surface, and apprentices slumped against the wall, exhausted but glowing with pride. You sweep up the shards, telling them that pottery is really just patience disguised as mud. They nod, half asleep, and you smile, because tomorrow they'll wake up and try again, and one day, when their hands move steady and sure, they'll remember these shattered beginnings and maybe even laugh about how much clay they wasted. Tonight, you sit with a half-finished jar in your lap, tracing your fingertip across the damp clay. Then, carefully, you carve a small mark on the base. Just a swirl, a symbol, something that says, "This was yours." Nobody asked you to do it, but you can resist leaving a little fingerprint of pride. Here's the historical anchor. Many Nubian pots carry marks and sized lines, dots, or abstract shapes on the underside. Scholars debate endlessly whether these were potters' signatures, workshop emblems, or simply lucky charms scratched in at the last minute. Some insist they were codes for trade, like "this jar holds oil, not grain." Others argue they were doodles, nothing more. You shrug, carving your own. You know the truth. At least for you, it's part practical, part superstition, and part plain vanity. The apprentices hover nearby, curious. Why mark the bottom? No one sees it. You grin, a plan. That's the point. The gods see it, and maybe one day some scholar with a magnifying glass. They tilt their heads, clearly unconvinced, before wandering off to break another bowl. The mark feels like your secret handshake with the future. You imagine someone, centuries from now, holding your pot shard and debating in a dim lecture hall. Does this swirl indicate clan identity or production cycle? Meanwhile, the real answer is that you were just bored on a Tuesday night. You chuckle at the thought of confusing generations of experts. Here's a quirky aside. Some Nubian pottery shows repetitive patterns, like tiny crosses or fishbone scratches, suggesting more than one person might have been copying the same symbol. Were these apprentices practicing, or was it a potter's guild trying to look official? Historians still argue, but you like the image of secret guild meetings, where everyone dramatically unveils their signature swirl. The jar in your lap feels sturdier once marked, almost as if the symbol itself reinforces it. Rational? No, but potters deal with too much breakage to dismiss lucky rituals. You whisper a blessing over it of prayer, half inside joke and set it aside to try. By lamplight, you glance at the shelves. A whole row of pots gleams faintly, each hiding a tiny swirl, a dot, or a crooked line on its base. Your private gallery of symbols. No one else may notice, but you know. Your life, your year, your hands are inscribed here, and long after the market coins are spent, the marks will remain, whispering to strangers you'll never meet. You smile, realizing that in a world where clay crumbles and pots shatter, the smallest scratch can still echo forever. The wheel hums tonight like a sleepy bee. You press your foot against the treadle, and it spins steady. A lower filling the workshop. The apprentices slump in the corner, yawning, but you're wide awake because this is your favorite. The clay rising, shaping, stretching into something useful, and while your hands work, your mouth does too. You start to hum, then hum becomes a tune. Before long, you're practically giving a private concert to your pots. Potter's songs aren't written down anywhere, but you know them by heart. Little chants about the Nile's floods, jokes about cracked jars, lullabies that keep your fingers in rhythm. Sometimes you invent verses on the spot. Stay round. Little bowl, don't wobble away. It's silly, but the wheel seems to spin smoother when you sing. The apprentices laugh, then quietly join in, their voices soft but eager. Soon, your workshop sounds less like work and more like rehearsal for a festival. Here's your history anchor. Oral traditions were strong in Nubia, while written records survived mostly from temples and officials. Everyday songs were chants, harvest melodies, and yes, probably potter's ideas are passed down by memory. Archaeologists can't dig up sound, but they can find clues. Some ceramic shards even bear incised marks that look suspiciously like rhythm notations. Scholars still debate whether these were actual music guides or just decorative scratches. You smile, imagining your silly potter's chant baffling researchers centuries later. The music spreads. Neighbors passing by slow down. Curious, a shepherd joins in from the street, his flute weaving through your hummed rhythm. Children clap their hands offbeat, but no one minds. For a moment, the whole quarter of the village feels like it's revolving on the same potter's wheel. Voices circling together. Quirky fact, in some villages, pottery wheels doubled as instruments. A wooden bass, when struck, produced a hollow drum-like sound. You test it yourself, tapping the wheel while humming, and yes, it works. The apprentices erupt in laughter, insisting you're now a one-man band. You bow dramatically, clay-smeared hands raised, while your half-finished jar spins lazily behind you. The song fades as the night deepens, replaced by the softer sound of the wheel slowing down. You lift the jar carefully, still damp, and place it beside its siblings. The silence after music feels even sweeter, like the whole village has inhaled and finally exhaled together. You sit back, stretching your tired legs, and grin. Pots may not sing, but tonight they were born to music, and maybe, if you listen closely tomorrow, you'll hear the echo of your own humming sealed into their walls. You wake to the sound of drums, not kilns. The village is already buzzing. Weddings always start early here. You've been asked to deliver jars big enough to store beer for the feast. And while the dancers twirl and musicians warm their flutes, you stagger through the crowd carrying a pot that weighs almost as much as a donkey. Everyone cheers, not for you exactly, but for what your jar represents. Celebration, abundance, the promise of drink. Pottery has a way of sneaking into every milestone. Weddings need vessels for beer. Funerals need urns for ashes. You never thought of yourself as essential to the life cycle of the village. But here you are, somewhere between matchmaker and undertaker. Except your tool is mud, historical anchor. Nubian burials often contain pottery. Sometimes simple bowls, sometimes elaborate vessels. Archaeologists still debate whether these pots were symbolic gifts for the afterlife, or just practical containers for food and drink offerings. Either way, your work doesn't end when life does. The same hands that make a jar for wedding beer shape the urn that holds a grandfather's bones. There's something humbling in that. Back at the wedding, your jars sit proudly by the banquet area. People dip ladles in and laugh as froth spills over. You watch nervously, hoping no one trips and sends hours of labor smashing across the dance floor. But the jars hold steady, stoic guardians of the party. The bride even pats you on the shoulder, declaring, "Good jars, but the beer tastes better in them." You accept the compliment, even though you're fairly certain beer tastes good in any container. Later that week, the drums sound again but softer, as lower. A funeral procession winds through the same streets, and once again, you walk alongside, this time carrying a small, polished urn. No laughter, no froth. Just solemn nods. You set the vessel gently by the grave, and it disappears into the earth with the departed. You can't help but think the same clay that held beer yesterday now carries memory today. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Nubian funerary vessels bear decorations of animals, birds, fish, cattle. Scholars argue whether these symbols mankind's for the soul, clan markers, or simply someone doodling while distracted. You suspect it's all of the above. Grief needs symbols as much as celebrations need froth. As the sun dips, you sit quietly outside your workshop, reflecting. Your pots may not speak, but they witness everything. Weddings, funerals, dinners, offerings. They outlast the laughter, the tears, sometimes even the memories. And though your name may fade, your clay carries the village's life from cradle to grave. The merchant's arrival is hard to miss. He's loud, his donkey louder, and his cloak still carries the salt smell of the Red Sea. He plops himself down in your workshop, looks around at your neatly stacked jars, and says, "Fine work, but can you make something different?" You raise an eyebrow. Different how? He grins and sketches with his finger on the dirt floor. A tall, skinny vessel, decorated with spirals that twist like snakes chasing their own tails. Oh, and one more requirement: it must never, ever leak. You laugh so hard you nearly choke. A pot that never leaks. That's like asking the Nile to stop flooding politely. Still, merchants bring coins, and coins bring lentils. So you nod and pretend this is perfectly reasonable. Here's the historical nugget. Nubian Saturday at a crossroads of trade routes. Goods from the Red Sea, Central Africa, and Egypt all pass through, and potters often faced requests for unfamiliar shapes and styles. Archaeologists even find vessels in Nubia with designs more common to far-off regions. Evidence of these cultural exchanges. Scholars still debate whether local artisans were inspired by imports or simply pressured by demanding merchants. Judging by today's commission, you'd argue it's a bit of both. You set to work, spinning clay into a tall, thin column. The wheel wobbles under the strain, like it's protesting. Why are we making a giraffe instead of a pod? You hum to steady your hands, carving spirals carefully. The apprentices whisper that it looks like a snake jar. You remind them snakes leak less than water jars, which earns a chorus of giggles. Quirky aside, some excavated vessels really do seem oddly impractical to narrow to clean, too tall to balance, too decorative to use daily. Were they prestige items, made just to impress? Or were they functional in ways we've forgotten? Scholars argue, but as you balance this tall pot on your knee, you're leaning toward prestige item nobody actually used. When the kiln work begins, your heart races, thin walls crack easily, and the spirals risk warping. You hover anxiously, whispering bribes to the fire. I'll give you extra wood if you just spare this one. Captain Ash, your claybird mascot, sits by the kiln like a stern supervisor. Somehow, against all odds, the pot survives. The merchant returns, inspects the spirals, taps the rim, and thankfully pays without complaint. You breathe out, relieved. As he leaves, he promises to take your snake jar far across the desert. Who knows? Maybe it will end up in a palace. Maybe it will carry onions. Maybe it will just confuse future archaeologists. Either way, your pottery has officially traveled farther than you ever will. And that thought makes your muddy little workshop feel just a bit bigger tonight. You hear the knock before you see him. It's not the polite tap of a neighbor, or the clumsy thump of an apprentice, sharp, deliberate, the kind of knock that doesn't wait to be welcomed. You open the door, and there he is, the tax collector. His sandals are cleaner than yours will ever be, his expression carved from stone, and is already scanning your shelves like a hawk circling prey. He doesn't bother with small talk. His eyes sweep over your rows of pots, jars, and lamps. Busy year, he remarks, which you know really means, I can smell your coins. You try a nervous chuckle, but it falls flat. This man isn't here for jokes. Here's the historical backdrop. Taxation in Nubia varied over centuries, but artisans were often expected to contribute not just in money but also in goods. Archaeologists have uncovered pottery stored in government warehouses, suggesting that sometimes pots themselves became tax payments. Scholars still debate whether potters were taxed more heavily than farmers, or if everyone just felt like they carried the heaviest load. As you stand here, sweat on your brow, you put your money on the ladder. The collector picks up a water jar, tapping it like he's testing fruit at the market. This one, he declares, then another, then another. You want to protest those were meant for paying customers, for neighbors who actually smile when they see you. But you bite your tongue. Complaining to a tax collector is like complaining to the Nile. You can shout all you want, but the flood comes anyway. Quirky fact. Some shards of pottery bear official stamps, thought to be tax seals. Historians argue whether these were proof of payment or proof of confiscation. You are the collector's stylus and clay seal as he presses it into one of your jars, leaving a mark that says, "Not yours anymore." Future archaeologists will puzzle over that symbol. You already know what it means. Dinner just got smaller this week. The apprentices watch silently, their white eyes tracking every confiscated pot. One whispers, "Why doesn't he just make his own?" You stifle a laugh, because really that's the question, isn't it? But you hush them quickly. The last thing you need is sass aimed at a man who could decide your entire workshop looks taxable. Finally, the collector departs, his donkey groaning under the weight of your hard work. The silence he leaves behind is heavier than the pots themselves. You sink onto your stool, rubbing clay-streaked hands against your knees, and mutter something that sounds halfway between a curse and a prayer. Your shelves are emptier, Your pouch lighter, but your spirit, well, it's dented, not shattered, because tomorrow you'll still wake up, dig clay, and spin the wheel. Taxes may take your pots, but they can't take the mud under your nails. At least, feels untouchable. Festival days feel different from the moment you wake. The air hums with music. Children paint their faces with ash and ochre, and the streets fill with laughter that drowns out even the loudest donkeys. For you, though, festivals mean extra work. People don't just want plain cooking pots, they want colors, shine, something special to mark the day. So you spend the morning preparing clay for vessels that will look brighter than the torches lighting the night. Your workshop transforms into a carnival of its own. You mix slips of red and black, grind mineral pigments, and polish the surfaces of half-finished bowls until they glow like river stones. One apprentice accidentally paints his arm instead of the pot, strutting around as if he's invented festival fashion. You let him keep it after all. Maybe he has. Here's the historical thread. Archaeologists have uncovered Nubian ceramics with striking red and black burnish finishes and sometimes even colored glazes. These weren't everyday items. They were showpieces, likely tied to rituals or festivals. Scholars still debate whether the techniques originated in Nubia or were influenced by Egyptian imports. Standing here, with your arms coated in red slip and your kiln roaring like a lion, you think the answer is obvious. No matter where the idea came from, the hands that made it yours are undeniably Nubian. By midday, your kiln breathes rainbow smoke. The neighbors gather outside. Curious, some swear the colors are omens. Others just admire the spectacle. You're too busy sweating and muttering promises to the fire to worry about omens. If even one pot emerges uncracked and glowing, you'll call it a miracle worthy of the gods. Quirky fact, some shards from Nubian sites show decorative patterns that archaeologists describe as possibly symbolic. Possibly just doodles. You grin at that because half the time when you carve zigzags into a pot, you're not channeling divine secrets, you're just killing time while the clay dries. If future scholars want to see cosmic meaning in your boredom, let them. As evening falls, you carry your finished vessels to the festival square. Torches flicker, drums pound, dancers leap, and your brightly polished bowls catch the firelight like stars caught in clay. People buy them eager-lining just for food, but for display, as if the pots themselves are part of the celebration. Later, you sneak a moment to sit with a bowl of beer, watching children chase sparks from the bonfire. Around you, your work gleams in every direction. It's strange. You think, for most of the year, pottery is invisible, taken for granted. But tonight, under firelight and music, your craft feels like it belongs to the festival itself. And you smile, because for once, you don't just make the background of life, you make the celebration. The year closes not with a bang, but with ash. Your old kiln, faithful through floods, feasts, and far too many tantrums, finally shows its age. The bricks crumble, the draft falters, and smoke seeps out of cracks like tired sighs. You crouch beside it, brushing your hand across its warm surface, and realize it has served its time. A potter's year ends here, in the quiet collapse of claiming fire. Dismantling a kiln is strangely emotional. You stack aside usable bricks, sweep away the rubble, and pause to remember each batch it carried. The jars for weddings, the urns for funerals, the snake pot for that eccentric merchant. The ghosts of your work feel etched into the walls. Archaeologists one day will probably argue about whether this kiln fell in a flood or was deliberately retired. You chuckle, knowing the truth. Sometimes a kiln just gets old, and a potter just gets tired. Here's the historical note. Kilns in Nubia were often rebuilt every few years. The combination of intense heat, seasonal floods, and plain old use wore them down quickly. Some excavated sites show overlapping kiln foundations, layers of destruction and renewal, proof that each generation quite literally built upon the last. Scholars debate whether each rebuild was seen as a ritual of renewal or simply the only practical option. EU, hauling bricks with aching arms. Vote for practical. Still, there's something ceremonial about starting fresh. You mark a new spot in the yard, higher ground this time, and set the foundation for a new kiln. The apprentices help, chattering excitedly about how this one will surely be stronger, hotter, better. You let them dream. In truth, you know little of its own quirks. Kilns are like stubborn relatives. But for now, the promise of new beginnings is enough. A quirky aside. Some potters reportedly buried small charms in the foundations of new kilns. These figurines, even broken pots from the old one. Were these protective offerings, or just convenient disposal? Historians still debate, but tonight you decide to slip in one of your own cracked bowls. Not for magic, not for superstition, but as a reminder that every flaw builds the path to something stronger. As the stars rise, you wipe sweat from your brow, staring at the skeleton of tomorrow's kiln. The year has circled back to clay and fire, to mud under your nails and smoke in your lungs. Your shelves may be fuller, your hands more calloused, but in the end, it all returns to the same truth. Pottery is never finished. It only pauses, waiting for the next season, the next flood, the next pair of muddy hands to carry it forward. And with that thought, you smile into the darkness, soot-streaked and exhausted, but ready for another year. And now, traveler, you've walked through an entire year in the muddy footprints of a Nubian potter. You've waded through Nile floods, fed the kiln with nervous prayers, shaped jars for weddings and urns for farewells. You've sung songs over spinning wheels, argued with clay, and laughed at apprentices who accidentally invented abstract art. A whole cycle of life, pressed into clay, fired in smoke, and carried in quiet hands. But here, at the edge of the story, everything slows. The kiln grows silent, the wheel stops humming, and the village itself seems to hold its breath. You sit down on a reed mat, the same way you did on the very first day, except now your hands carry the memory of a year's work. There's no rush anymore. The pots on your shelves will keep. The river will flood again in its own time. The fire can wait until morning. So let the images fade, the jars gleaming in firelight, the children laughing with clay-streaked cheeks, the smoke curling into a starlit sky. Let them drift like dreams, soft and harmless. Your body feels heavier now, not with work, but with rest pulling you gently down. The story has ended, but its rhythm lingers like the wheel spinning slowly, lower, until it finally stops, and you can't stop. 2. Close your eyes, let the Nile's hush carry you.